coaching. I didn't come home till 10 o'clock at night, and I was leaving at 7 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden I didn't really have a social life. And it was then when you're choosing football over me, and I go, well, yeah, I am, because football has been here before you, and football will be here after you, and that's the one thing I'm going to dedicate myself to. We laugh and joke about it now, but yeah, it's an industry where if you really, really take it seriously and want to be the best that you can, especially like for me, where as a coach and a player, and I'm like on the training pitch at 5 o'clock in the evening, and potentially not finished training until 10 o'clock at night, and then I've got a job in the daytime. It's quite hard to buy into, and you've only really got yourself to kind of motivate yourself and look after yourself. You're in these different environments. Like I've got my teammates, I've got coaching staff, I've then obviously got my family, but you yourself only realise what you're doing and the sacrifices you're making and actually how much you want it.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Reflective Coach podcast with Coach Luca. In this week's episode, I'm delighted to welcome professional footballer and coach Lauren Haynes. Now, before I get into the detail for this, I would just like to apologise for not getting this episode out in a 2-week frame previous to this week. It's been the first time this year where I haven't released consecutive episodes, simply because it was bank holiday weekend on the first weekend, and unfortunately I was impacted by COVID and was wiped out on the second one. So I can only apologise for the delay. Now, I'm absolutely delighted to get this episode out there, and I'm gutted that there was that delay in the first time that it's happened this year, not to get that episode out consistently. However, it's just one of those things, but it is such a great episode, and it's going to be absolutely worth the wait. Now, it's been great to speak to Lauren because she's had such a wonderful career in terms of on the pitch and off the pitch as well. Now, the women's game, as we know, here in England is growing. I say here in England, I'm Welsh based, but here in Britain then, and then in terms of that professional status, it is growing, especially in England, because of the magnitude and stature of the clubs. Now, Oxford United are a well-known women's team, and they have a very strong setup in terms of the club as itself, a very good men's seniors, very good community, very good women's, and it's a very big club in a very good area. Now, the women's game is growing, whereby the professional status of the women's side is starting to look like part-time to full-time, looking like there's more money going to be invested, more sponsors on board, more sustainability, more fans accessing the game, more women coming through, more girls, improved academy status and structure, and it's really an exciting prospect because the game is growing and growing and growing, and it's going to be really exciting to see where it is now to where it is in 10 years. So when it comes to players like Lauren, and as we said within this episode, she is an advocate for the women's game right now. So as she's being that advocate, being that champion of change, and being part of that overall process of helping the game grow and move forward, whereby in 10 years it'll look very different and hopefully a lot more improved to where it is now in terms of having more of a professional status, more money, more clubs, hopefully a longer structure or a wider structure, and having more depth and opportunities. And it's great that Lauren is really contributing to that, and it's great that it is growing. However, what I said to her was, don't forget that you're a player here and now, and you must enjoy the journey. Even though you're creating those further opportunities for girls and women that are going to come through, don't forget that you have to enjoy it here and now. Now, Lauren has had a great journey. She's played for Bristol City Academy, she's played for Aston Villa, Oxford United Women, and England under-17s, as well as Arsenal. Now, in this episode, we spoke about the prospect of potentially moving away from Oxford and what it may look like for her. She has been at Oxford for several years, on and off the pitch. She has been a coach, she's been a sport development officer, she's been a girls' academy manager, and she's had such a big investment in terms of Oxford herself. Now, she's had a lot to do with the club, where she has had a big impact as both a player and a professional, and she's been able to grow in terms of her overall status, in terms of her overall personal and professional life. She's been able to bring much to the club as a player and as a professional, and it's great to have seen her grow as a coach and what that impact is. Now, when we were talking, we spoke about having the time to settle down and enjoy your life, because there's been a lot of movement, there was a lot of commitment, obviously travelling over the years, and now getting to a point whereby she has a very good coaching job, enjoying playing, enjoying where she's living. And although we spoke about it and we highlighted the prospect of potentially moving away, she said it would take a lot in terms of that decision making. However, for her, since recording this episode and where we're at, she's actually moved to Ireland for Sion Women's FC, and she's actually playing in Ireland for a club that's moving towards a professional status. So it's really interesting that Lauren has made that move and made that decision, how that has come up and how that may have changed her decision making, what factors have come into play, why she's made that decision to move from Oxford, especially after we had that great conversation. And it's great in this episode because it's really unique, because we're looking at a person's journey, but we're also looking at a Q&A series with a professional footballer, play for Oxford United Women's, and I class her as professional as well as a coach. So it's a combination of two in one. So you're really getting a great episode and a great insight here. So it was great to have someone who understands the game from a player mindset and a coaching mindset. So he spoke about systems and how players may fit into systems or alternating systems to fit the players, working in blocks in terms of her own coaching now, and looking at achievable targets, which is quite an interesting sort of way to break up the season. And I know a few professional managers have done this through reading, and they literally block the games and set out the objectives, and then they continue to build. Now, we also highlighted personalities, different personalities coming into the group in terms of that team, how then she may look at those personalities from a coaching perspective, and how she may build on that in terms of socially, that culture, that environment, the teamship, and how that continues to build. And it's all about having like-minded people in that social aspect to really push forward, to help build, to buy into that culture, to buy into the objectives, and to help really take the club forward. Now, the success and being students of the game, that's where the success comes from, because as you're continuing to adapt, continuing to learn, continuing to push yourself, you must really be that like-minded person and create that culture and that environment whereby you are students of the game to continue on that journey, to continue to move forward whilst enjoying it, whilst trying to help the club, and whilst being a professional footballer. So Lauren spoke about inspiring the next generation, where she's going with that, and as I mentioned earlier on in the episode, it's really important that she must enjoy where she is now. Now, she played for a boys team beforehand, girls football, and at the age of 14 she was with Arsenal Academy, and then she has since progressed into that senior environment, and we spoke about that journey from being a junior to a senior, how that may look, what she will do as a coach to support those players in that process herself, and how she's enjoyed it. But she's had great experiences from Arsenal, Bristol, Oxford, Aston Villa, England and 17s, being a captain to Oxford United Women's, playing in the Women's League in England, which is growing and really challenging and pushing forward. She's been a captain, she's been an academy manager, she's now transferred over to Ireland, and she is now advocating that continued change and having success over there, and is captain there now. She's overcome injury, which has seen her out for a long period of time, and we actually spoke about that and how that impacted her mentally, how it may have affected her being away from the team, or new players coming in, or her position, and how that may have affected her relationship with the manager, or how she was supported, and how she utilises that in supporting players in that process in terms of that psychology and that journey as a coach now. So just on the basis of that, she has had a lot of success, and it was great to really speak to Lauren, and there is so much in this episode in that sense. We were looking at a professional footballer in terms of that journey, as well as a coach with a combination of mindset, looking at individual mindset across that, from professional footballer to a professional coach, looking at that journey as well as a person to where she is now. There is so much in this episode. It's a fantastic one to listen to, and I'm so glad I can finally get this out there. It's a big thanks from me, and I'm glad that Lauren could come on. She was an excellent interviewee, and in the 4 months since we last spoke, her journey has continued, and just that sheer change in a 4-month period has been massive, and so much has gone on. But I wish Lauren the biggest success, as I always have, and it's great to see her journey and where she's going to go, and I hope to have her on again in the future, and we can continue to build on the Reflective Coach podcast and have that real reflection. You can find the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Podcast Addict and Anchor. You can also find it on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. It is at TRC Podcast _ on Twitter. It is the Reflective Coach Podcast everywhere else. You can also find it on podcast, on TikTok, I am Anthony_Luca96. Drop a like, drop a follow, drop a comment, leave a subscribe. It is really appreciated. Let's continue to get the shares, the listeners and the views out there. Let's get the follows and subscribes, and I hope this can continue to share and create that network. It was great to bring this episode to you. This is the Reflective Coach Podcast by Coach Luca.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. I see the mix of Arsenal and Chelsea behind you straight away. That's a bit of an odd one.
Chelsea and Celtic, I know.
So what is it between the two shirts there then?
Grew up loving Lampard, just loved him. So managed to get a signed shirt a few years back and popped it in a frame. And then I'm a massive Celtic fan, so got a little book there which is Celtic, and then a Tierney signed shirt because Arsenal played Oxford in the FA Cup literally a few weeks back, and I managed to get a signed shirt off him. So
Hey, doing all right then?
Yeah, exactly. So I love it.
do you support Celtic for any reason, or?
Honestly, just because my granddad or my step granddad was a Rangers fan, and as a kid, kind of was like a little ongoing joke with me and my grandma being like, "Oh, I'll support Celtic," and she was clueless with footy. And then one year bought me a Celtic shirt, and he was fuming. And ever since, I just grew up supporting Celtic. So
Hey, there you are then. That's where it comes from. My dad's a United fan, but I'm actually a Chelsea fan myself. So
okay.
I'm very happy that you got the Lampard shirt there. But I will admit that I've actually got an Arsenal jacket in my cupboard. I was just in Sports Direct the one day, and it was like a nice Puma red colour. Always loved the colour. I was like, I'm buying it, but I've never actually worn it. It's just hidden away.
Class.
So how's your week been?
Yeah, not too bad actually. Been quite quiet this week, which has been nice. Obviously been training and stuff, bit of coaching, but apart from that, I've had actually quite a quiet week.
Yeah, take it while it happens, because obviously you're very busy between playing and obviously coaching as well. A lot comes just with playing alone and then just coaching, but combining both, it can be a hard world to switch off from, especially when players get in contact. Vice in terms of the ones that you coach as well as the ones that you play with.
Yeah, no, definitely, and like. It's like when people say, like, you never switch off, and you finish training, you're always thinking towards the next day, what have I got to do today? And then when you're coaching, you're planning, like for younger kids, and then you think, I've got to deal with the parents as well. And there's lots to think about. And then if I'm not playing or coaching, then I'm probably watching it. So
there you are then. Do you find that more difficult then to sort of make both marry up in terms of playing and coaching, or would you say at one point you would like to move away from one and just focus solely on one?
Yeah, I think like when I was younger, I did. I got injured, so did all my coaching badges like relatively quickly. So I did my like level 1, level 2 in my youth award in the space of about 18 months. Like when I was about 16, 17, 18. So and then when I went back, and I just coached purely because I weren't playing footy. And then when I had started doing the both again, I actually found that because of how much to coach, I actually was becoming a better player because of it. And then I've just been like that now for like 7 years, and I absolutely love it. And I think once my legs pack in, I'll probably just focus purely on the coaching side. But for now, I'm quite happy doing both of them.
That's good that you enjoy both, and it's good obviously you get that coaching insight and you get that perspective of obviously when your managers and coaches make changes or when they give out dialogue, and because sometimes players don't always understand the decisions of a coach and why they do certain things. So for example, my team were playing the other week, my left back had a yellow card, I only had one defensive player on the bench, I was our only sub for the game, and he was going to come on anyway, but as soon as the one boy got yellow carded, I brought him off and he was quite angry. But after at the end of the game, I was like, you got yourself yellow carded. You made yourself then the obvious change. So it's like little things from a coaching perspective that they don't understand. Whereas when you start coaching, you can broaden that up a little bit more. Do you find it difficult then to switch off a coaching mind when you are playing? Because obviously when I start playing, I lose interest in the game straight away because I'm like, I want to coach him. I want to do that. I want to change this.
I think like... Yeah and no. I think when like league games and league situations and the pressures like for me to perform, I'm quite good at just focusing on the game and doing my job well. And if I'm not doing my job well, I'm helping others around me. And because we've got quite an experienced squad now at Oxford, so a lot of them kind of know what they need to do. It's just their own decision making, and I don't think a lot of the time you can coach that. I think a lot of that's down to their motivation and how you go around that side of it. But with the type of players that we've got, weirdly, I've just come off the back of obviously an injury, and I've had to get some minutes with the kids, so I'll have 23s. But I feel like when I play in that situation, I'm constantly coaching. I played a game at the weekend, and it was lovely because some of the girls that I signed for Oxford when they were 10, 11 years old, I was then sharing a pitch with. So I've got like little Ellie next to me who's 16. I've had her since 8 years old, and one of the centre backs, Shay, again had her since 8, but she was playing behind me, and I felt like I was coaching them when I was playing because it's just the type of game that it was, and that part of it, like for Sunday, I really, really enjoyed that because it was nice to see them come through the system. I was coaching them and I was playing alongside them, and also I had to play quite well because otherwise they'll be looking at me thinking, "Come on, you've been my coach for like 10 years. Like, come on."
Yeah, absolutely. You can't not be good then. That's why I don't join in training sometimes. I'm like, oh, I don't want to show the lack of ability that I have compared to some of the other boys. But yeah, it's great that you say that because sometimes people criticise having older players or players from a first team playing in, the youth games, etc. But I find that experience is more beneficial, and you can bring all that first team experience with you, your background, your story, obviously what's expected in terms of the first team environment, and then obviously you're able to coach them and you're able to bring them up. So I think having a player with a little bit of experience or a few years older really does benefit. And even though it's under 23s, you're only 25 yourself, aren't you?
27 now.
27.
Yeah,
oh yeah, sorry, I was thinking my own age then. That's because you were born in 1995, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, but you're only a few more years older, and it's not like when United signed like a 35-year-old in that sense. But it is obviously just having that bit of experience, which can be really helpful. Because last week again, we were really short in 19s, so I had one senior player, which is my best mate. He's only come back after like 10 years of not playing, and I took him just for his experience in terms of professionalism around the squad, and it was great to have him there in terms of when we were short, and just to give off that experience that some of the other clubs are like, oh, you're playing all the players that gain the advantage in this. We're like, no, we're bringing him for experience. Literally, he had 10 minutes. He didn't really impact the game, but it was just around that environment and dressing room that he was beneficial for.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's vital, and I think what I've been a youngster in an adult change room, and I know it's daunting, and you struggle with the expectations. You don't know what it's going to be like. You think everyone's going to be nasty to you and looking at you, and you're probably quite paranoid. And I think, like you said there, when you've got experienced players, then when the youngsters, it just allows that process of them stepping up through the pathway to ease them in a little bit, and they probably do learn a few more words. They probably do learn a few more behaviours and things like that. But that's also senior footy, and I think the sooner they learn that, they're more able to adapt when they do get into that senior environment. And I think that's one thing that we do really good at Oxford is the moment with girls footy, you can only play senior football when you're 16. So the moment they turn 16 in the academy, we give them that opportunity with our 23s and our first team who train alongside each other to understand kind of the environment, to look up to the senior players. And once actually they have a conversation with the senior player, they go, they're just normal people. Do you know what I mean? And on the pitch, they might be a little bit more angry and because they're passionate and competitive for the game and they want to win. But once they realise actually the step up, they're just people, I think it allows that process of the youngsters then to be a little bit more comfortable to thrive in, rather than be a little bit scared and back off and then don't do as well as what they need to do.
And it's great that you say that because a few clubs will have then obviously 16s, 18s, still have that youth sort of age and then go, right, this is first team. And then it's a big jump between first team because then they don't know the players there, they don't know how to transition or adapt, as you say. And it can be quite difficult. And it relates a lot to where I've taken over an under-19 squad this year. So the club that I'm with have a first, seconds and thirds. And the expectation is for our 19s to train alongside them and go to their training sessions. And it's only this year as I've come in, I said I want my own dedicated 19 session where the club's never done that before. I said because the group are playing every week, they need to have that consistency amongst each other as well as playing senior football. But where they are playing senior football, they get picked on the weekend, they're training, they know all the older boys, they know how to integrate, and they're starting to get picked up first team and so on. Where a few of the boys have struggled with the adaptation of coming straight into seniors football, for example, and they would have expected that little age range between 16 to 18 and then seniors. So because it has been that integration with the seniors, a few of them have dropped off and said, no, not for me, don't like it, don't enjoy it. And that's because the environment has changed. You're in an adult world, then essentially it's a lot more difficult, bit more physical, you're expected to run a lot more, or you're covering bigger pitches. Obviously, you're at games longer rather than just turning up compared to youth. And one or two of their parents have sort of got involved in that and stuck up for them. I was like, well, this is what it is now. Youth football's gone. As much as we got it now for the next 2 years, it's now looking at seniors football. Now, I've been there, done it, didn't enjoy it, went into coaching, so I can understand from their point of view. But it is, well, you either want it now or you don't, and it's quite difficult to see the players drop off. But then you also see the players who want it the most, and then the ones who want it the most, obviously the ones then you're able to focus on and work with, especially at Oxford, for example, when you're trying to get them into the first team and working with the academy, etc.
Yeah, do you know what? So that just reminds me of when, must have been about 5 years ago, when Oxford, we played in the WSL2 at the time, and we went down a division because of funding and how the leagues all changed like that. But when that happened, we actually ended up losing our development team, so the bridge between our 16s academy and our first team. And what we found with that is, by the time they were 16, we couldn't bring them up to first team training at that time because it wasn't right for them, because they hadn't been prepared for that. But also, we had to really, really push our academy because they were leaving 16. The next exit route was our first team, and we lost a lot of players. And I think we only ended up keeping 2 over the 3 years. Some went out on loan, some were kind of fringe players, some were just kind of signed as training players. But we had to change our whole academy ethos for a while, because we had to now start producing players for when they're 16 to be competitive for senior football. Otherwise, they've got nowhere to be at the club because we didn't have that pathway to bridge the gap. When we then got a little bit more funding, I think it was about 3 years ago, we brought in the 23 squad, which has now been going for 3 years now. It's been massive because it then allows, like I said, it allows that integration, it allows the pathway to take place, it allows players to be able to start training up when they're ready. If they're not quite ready because they've had a knock in their circumstances or whatever, they can stay in that pool. It allows first team players to drop down and gain minutes, and if they're good enough, they're old enough, and they can go get experience with the first team, which we show at Oxford within kind of FA Cup and League Cup situations.
And it's great that you provide those opportunities and have that funding to start that under-23s and re-establish yourselves essentially, because women's football is on the grow, but it's unfortunate where it has been impacted as such, whereas then the system was changed, and then it changed the philosophy, it changed obviously funding or how players were coming in and out of the club, the loan system. And we sort of had a similar thing here in Wales. We don't have a system as big as the Women's Super League in England, but we had a restructure a couple of years ago, and one of the top teams ended up being dropped into the bottom league, and they just dominated all season and then got promoted straight away. And there was a lot of uproar around it in terms of how they were playing, and they are struggling a little bit this year. But it was just a shame that's what happened in terms of that restructure. But when it comes down to it, obviously it's trying to grow the game for the long term and obviously get the amount of players in. And it's great that participation is increasing in that sense, and that more opportunities being provided. But it's great that these first team opportunities are coming up, and a great documentary is the one on BBC iPlayer where Dorking Women's. That's quite a good insight in terms of how they're trying to grow the game and how sustainable it needs to become, because it's not an easy gig, trying to set something up entirely. But obviously then when you're in the lower league championship, it's just difficult to have that sustainability anyway. But then when clubs are trying to go, right, we're trying to do women's, we're trying to do an academy, we're trying to do regional talent centres, it's a lot to take on for a club that might not be Premier League standard, but it's a lot to balance. But it's great that we're having more teams such as Oxford United Women's, and it's great that the game is going that way.
Yeah, and footy is a business ultimately. As much as we try and say, and coaches and players try and say it's not. Ultimately, it does come down to money, and it comes down to funding. The more money you have, the more you can do. The less money you have, the less you can do, and then quality dips in and out of that as well. And Oxford, we've done well, and I was around when the WSL first formed. I think I was at Bristol as a kid. I was 16, and I was fortunate enough to play. It was like WSL 1 at the time for Bristol, and got some appearances there. And Mark Sampson was the manager, obviously England gaffer, and obviously Welsh boy, isn't he? So he took me at 16, and I was there kind of when that first WSL started. And it was a weird one because I never went into girls footy until I was about 14. I signed for Arsenal in the academy. I was just playing boys football grassroots. So for me, all I ever saw growing up was like male football, and following Celtic. I like Chelsea, and my dad's a United fan, unfortunately, and the house was always soccer Saturday, things like that. And it's only when I went to Arsenal I was like, oh, females play football, and obviously Arsenal being the women's team that they are, started to look up to a few role models, and obviously Arsenal being Arsenal, they were top of everything at the time. And I had a really difficult decision when I was 17, when I finished the academy, and I could have stayed at Arsenal, I could have gone to Chelsea, or Bristol popped up. And I went to Arsenal, obviously I knew it, I loved it. Wanted to go to Chelsea because I think it'd be cool to play for Chelsea. And then the last game of the season, we played Bristol, and Mark Sampson was there. I was like, look, come and have a look at what we can offer you. And I'm thinking, Bristol? Nah. Like, do you know what I mean? Because I was so naive to the game. And the teams in and around, and I couldn't even tell you half of the teams that were in the WSL, because I was like Arsenal, Chelsea, and they were the two big teams. And I went down and looked at Bristol, and it was the most incredible thing that they had everything. They had a youth system, they had a college, they had accommodation for players, and I've never seen anything like it before. That season I went, and we ended up coming second or something in the WSL that year, and ended up getting Champions League qualifications, come runners up in the FA Cup against Arsenal, annoyingly. But I think that there, when the little old WSL first started, compared to where it is now. Now, Bristol City are one of the major teams. They're in the Championship now, but they're one of the major teams. You've got teams like Durham that are the only standalone female team that compete in the Championship week in, week out. You've got a few with a little bit of cash, like your Man Uniteds and things like that have jumped system, Charlton, Crystal Palace. But that's always going to happen because it's a business. And what I think some clubs do really well, and obviously I'll say Oxford because I've been there for 7 years and I have to, but like your Bristols and your Durhams, and they've grown from scratch, and they've grown from homegrown players, and they've built up their finances because of what they do as a football club, not because of the big investment from the men's club. And I think we're seeing more and more of that. And I think that's where you say there with the Dorking, they're starting from the bottom and they're building. Southampton are actually a really good example, as much as it kills me because they tipped us to promotion last year, but they were in Tier 5, got promoted to Tier 4, got promoted to Tier 3, and they did things properly by winning and gaining promotion and doing things well off the pitch, which then obviously got them to where they are on the pitch, which is obviously, I think they're like second in the Championship now. So it's nice to see that the game's growing in the right way for a majority of clubs. And you'll still get them clubs that have got big cash injections you're never going to be able to compete with because of the owners. But I think the more and more the women's game goes, that's why it's so inclusive and why it's so accessible, because of the homegrown nature of it.
And let's hope that it continues that way. And it's great that, if whatever happened to the men, it doesn't have that impact on the women's, because the women's could be essentially outperforming the men that season. And you don't want a knock-on effect, because that would be so unfair in that sense of, right, you've performed better, but then the men haven't performed well, but you're the ones not thriving off the success that you're having because the men didn't have it. And it's great that the women's game is becoming more sustainable in terms of it's becoming standalone, and it doesn't have to become reliant on men's and so on. So if the men's would suddenly disappeared, the women's doesn't have to either. And it's great that you were a young player and you had those options of Arsenal, Chelsea, Bristol. And being a young player, that's obviously such difficult contrast to sort of have in front of you, because as much they're amazing, it's that, right, do I go to North London? Do I go to South London? Where am I going to stay? Who am I going to stay with? Do I go back to Bristol? How's my career going to play out? And suddenly when you have options on the table, there's so many questions surrounding you anyway, but especially when you're so young, you don't have that maybe experience behind you where you have made a move before, you don't know how things are going to pan out. It's quite difficult to make that, especially where you could go, oh, do you know what, if things don't work out, Bristol, Chelsea or Arsenal might not come back in for me. Or I could sign for Arsenal and Chelsea and be a rotational player, but at Bristol I might be the week in, week out starter. And it's so difficult to sort of comprehend a decision-making choice like that.
Yeah, and it is, and I don't think there's still, God, that was about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and I still think now there's probably still not enough education around the game to help young players make that decision. Like, I was 16, turning 17 then, and I just finished year 11, and all of a sudden I decided to move away from home to Bristol, from Oxford to Bristol. And beforehand, my mum and dad would drive me to training 3 days a week and my match at the weekend, and it had been the same. But now I had to relocate, and obviously me as a kid's gone, yeah, I can move away from home, I'll be able to look after myself, like, I'll be absolutely fine. And it's probably when I was there as well, I was like, I was fine. It's probably not until now when I reflect on it do I go, I was probably way too young to move away, and I was way too young to do what I did because the education in and around it. And I remember sitting there with my mum and my dad, and I had to think, at that time you didn't see footy as a full-time gig because of what it was. So I had to think about the education side of it and making sure that I had a bit of a backup plan. And that is really why Bristol tipped it, because the education system that they had, and I got put in digs, and I got looked after as a player whereas Arsenal was a little bit lower on the education, but it was Arsenal. And Chelsea, accommodation-wise, it was going to be difficult to go to, but it was Chelsea. And I speak to my mum and dad and they understand Bristol. I speak to my family and they understand Bristol, but I go into school and tell my mates, they'll be like, why have you just left Arsenal for Bristol? Yeah. Because they don't, whereas if you did it now, people wouldn't really bat an eyelid. But yeah, I think it is definitely one of them topics in terms of that exit routes out of academies that I don't think there's enough education about. There's definitely more, but that's still not enough education around. I think now the game's grown, all these agents are getting involved as well, which is difficult because actually are they there for the welfare of the player or are they there to get a few quid? And I think that's a part of the game I don't like, but it's still a part of the game. And I think more in the future does need to be done in terms of the welfare and looking after players in them big decisions, especially if they are at big clubs, or actually if they're at a smaller club and they're wanting to push on and go and challenge themselves. I think a lot more work in the game needs to be done for those.
I completely agree, and I was listening to the Fozcast a couple of days ago, and they were on about loan managers and how important they've started to become in terms of the game itself, and that is such an important role to have because, as you say, as a young player, if you're going out to someone you've never lived before, you've never set up a direct debit, you don't know how to pay things, or you've never really communicated with adults on a bigger sense, or they're going out drinking, and then suddenly you might get invited along, or how would you make that decision not to, and then dynamics change, or obviously a young player, you want to do it or you feel the pressure, and it's quite difficult. So you want someone who's experienced being in and around the game to sort of come around, drop in, or have those phone calls, or someone you can have on the end of the phone who's not an agent, because obviously the agent's going to tell you everything you need and want to know to keep you happy because they want you performing. So you're paying a wage for them, and then when a new move comes along they get a big cut from it, whereas loan managers are funded by the club and paid for, so realistically they're going to make the best choices for you in the interest of the club, not the interest of the player all the time. But we'll have that interest of the player, but it won't be like an agent in that sense. So I completely agree with you because it is quite a scary task. And even now, in a few years when I finish my degree, I'm contemplating going out to America to coach because my best mate lives out there. But I'm like sort of worrying about what's it going to be like to move out to America? Am I going to get along with the Americans? Because obviously it's a very different culture to what we have here in Britain. How am I going to adapt to like food, living, all these sort of contrasts, whereas a lot to take on. And I'll be at, towards 30 by then, unfortunately. But obviously, as a 16-year-old, that's quite a scary move. So we definitely need more people in and around the game, and it's great that the support mechanisms are in place. But I completely agree because where I am coaching the 19s that I've got now, a lot of them are ex-scholars and ex-players in the academy, and they sort of went through everything in the academy for years, gave everything up, got a scholarship, and then it was on that pathway, didn't get a professional contract, and then they sort of all dropped off. And then they were like, what now? And it's so hard to sort of see because as much as they got jobs and they're doing educational studies and they've had that experience behind them, it's the academy didn't really support them, or they've never touched them base to see how they're doing now. And even though they've gone on and had success in football still, they haven't gone, oh, look at what all these ex-players have done and well done. And it's just, as you say, it is a business, but it's so sort of heartless in that sense, and I just feel so much for these young kids because they gave so much, but then nothing is sort of being given back to them, not even like a drop-in phone call or look at what you're doing now, for example.
Yeah, you're completely right, and I think it's kind of that 16 to 19 era of players that they do get neglected unless you're very, very good. Because I think when you're in an academy system, you're looked after because you've got the protection of your mum and dad, you've got protection of you in school, every day you've got a routine no matter what you do. And when you're in senior football, you sign a contract or you sign your registration, you've probably got a job. If some people, if not, they're full-time footballer, and again you've got that routine. But I think as a 16 to 19-year-old, you're almost in that no man's land a little bit, and because you might be signed for the development team or the first team, you're not quite good enough, so you get minutes, so you get pushed up and down. The coaches use you a little bit because we need you as a bounce player here, but then actually you're going to go get your minutes for the kids at the weekend, and you don't know what you do. You're in that weird age as well where you have to stay in education till you're 18, so you're probably doing college on something that you don't want to do, or you're doing an apprenticeship, or you're working. And I think that age of boys and girls is really, really difficult. And I think what you said there in terms of like follow-up, one thing I know with the girls side for the FA is that they are, at the English FA, they're doing a lot more in terms of making sure that if a player's released or a player does go, that actually you know exactly where they're going, you know exactly where they've gone to, that you've done everything in your power to make sure it's the best level of challenge for that player if you decide you don't want them at the club anymore. And that actually, from a welfare point of view, that they're mentally stable and they're mentally okay, and you've kind of passed on that responsibility. And now I know the boys is a lot more cutthroat, like you said there, and you know, I've worked on a football education program, and I've had scholars coming in that have been like released from Oxford, released from Reading, released from Chelsea, Arsenal, like these big clubs, and they're just like, I don't know what to do in my life. And they go, and like you said, they haven't got really a clue how to do a direct debit, or they're asking me questions like how do I sort of weekly bus pass, and I think they've missed out on so much common sense education and street skills because they've been so protected in an academy. But now they're in the big wide world, and actually footy isn't going to be their number one priority anymore, and they can't rely on it. They're almost playing catch up a little bit to those who haven't been in the academy, haven't been playing football, and the ones that stay out late till 10 o'clock at night in the streets with their mates, or the ones that have been caught partying because they've had to get out of that and look after themselves in the streets. Do you know what I mean? And whereas footballers, you would never be able to do that because you'd have to be in bed by a certain time and be professional and do the right things. And I think that is such an interesting age group at the minute, the 16 to 19s, and across the boys, male and female. I think a lot of work needs to be done. What work and what the priority of how they deal with it, I don't know. But I think that's a gap in the whole football system that needs to be looked at.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And as you say, when you're so football centred and, you know, you've had that focus for years and it's all about football, and then it doesn't work out, and then suddenly they're like, oh, right, I've got to get a job, or I might have to go back and do this and that. It's quite scary for them in that sense, because they've given everything, and then it's sort of, right, where do I go from here? And they have a great experience, but it's also very limited in terms of only being in the academy system. And I suppose the same goes for you, because obviously you're doing a lot of coaching and playing now. You're in a good position where if, say, Oxford didn't renew your contract as a player, you're still in a good working position doing coaching. But you could realistically be a footballer, and they could say, right, you haven't got a contract at the end of the season, Lauren, and then you go, oh, what other offers are on the table? Do I have to move? Do I have to find somewhere else? Do I have to relocate? Do I have to go and stay with family or friends? And so many variables that can come into it in that sense. And when it comes down to it now, say, West Ham came in for you and offered you a deal, would that be sort of an easy move to go, oh yeah, do you know what? There's a 4-year contract on the table. It's good money. Or is it going, oh, I got coaching commitments and everything going on here as well. I might have to go, not for me at this time.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's actually a weird conversation I've had recently with some people, and because it's weird because obviously with Oxford we're part time, we compete at a very high level in terms of the standard. We're just second in tier 3, looking at promotion into the championship, and I've made my life work around what I do with footy. So I live in Oxford, I work in Oxford, I play footy in Oxford, I coach for Oxford. Everything, I've made my life work and adapt, and I obviously live to my lifestyle that I earn in my salary and my jobs, and then I play football. And I think if somebody could come into me and said, "Oh look, we're going to give you a 2-year deal," I would struggle because I wouldn't have any security of a job. I'd have to give up my flat. I'd have to change so much about my life for potentially only 2 years of footy. And we all know in footy, it's such a short career. I could play my first game and be injured.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I've sacrificed. So I've done done my B license. I've done my teaching qualification. I've done that on the side of being a footballer. And I think I've created a nice profile for myself in the job world that actually I'd have to give up all of that to go and play football at my age now, for potentially that wouldn't be for very long. And when that finishes, have to try and work out and start again in my job career. And I think they'd have to pay good money in order for me to even turn my head and do that. Whereas if I was 22, 23, I think, oh yeah, absolutely no brainer. And I think that's why now all these bigger teams and bigger clubs, if you're a pro, it's quite easy to make the transition from being a pro to being a pro. Or if you're a youngster at 17, 18, 19, you haven't got a lot of responsibilities, you've not got a partner, you've not got a mortgage, it's quite easy to go, oh yeah, I'm going to go give that a go. But when you're knocking on 27, 28, 29, I think you've got to really, really weigh up the pros and cons of, is this right for me? Am I going to give up all my job security to go and give full-time footy a go? I could stay at Oxford, get promoted, and actually be playing in the same league as them next year anyway. And I think, it'd be definitely food for thought, and it'd have to be a good offer. But I think realistically, you've got to look after your own life when you're kind of knocking on this age.
Absolutely, and it's an amazing one because you want it on the table, but then sometimes you might think, "Do you know, I'd rather it not be on the table because then I don't have to think about it." Because I remember once I was offered 2 jobs in the same week, and I got to Friday and I had the weekend to think about it, and it was the worst weekend of my life because you're weighing up the pros and cons of so much, and then you're constantly overthinking it. And then you're like, right, what is this the right choice or that? And you just sort of wish you had a time machine to sort of go, right, I'm going to take this one, but then if that doesn't work out, I'll go back to take the other contract. And as you say there, when you are 28 and so on, 28, 29, and you know, you are still very young in that sense, but it's also difficult because you want to have that stability in your life and go, do you know what, I don't want to give up my flat, or I don't want to move away from this job, or I enjoy what I'm actually doing. And, you know, you could end up fizzling out of playing professional football and making a career out of that naturally in terms of that progression, whereas a lot of players retire and then it's like, right, what's the next step from here and so on. And so is it quite difficult then in that sense in terms of if Oxford didn't renew your contract, you would go, do you know what, I'm happy to coach and see if another club comes in, or just sort of go, right, I got coaching, I'm not really too bothered about playing?
Yeah, I think for me, I will literally play until I can't physically play. And I think if Oxford did turn around to me at the end of the year and go, look, Lauren, thank you, but no thank you, I think I'm old and wise enough to, as long as they gave me the reasons, like, do you know what I mean? Not just because they just want to get rid of me, I'd be fuming. But if there were genuine reasons and there was better players coming in and they wanted to, you know, do something different, I'm old enough to understand and go, yeah, thank you, like, appreciate it. And I would go and look for footy elsewhere, and I'd make sure that I was playing. I think, yeah, later on, I think if I was struggling to move around the pitch and I wasn't feeling well myself physically, then I might just tone it down a little bit and drop down a couple of leagues and just probably play for a little bit more fun rather than competition. But I will always coach, and I think I know me and I know myself, and I love coaching. I love foundation phase, youth development phase, professional phase. I do love the foundation phase. That's like my baby. That's my go-to, and I will always coach because I always want to inspire the next generation, and whether that's girls footy, boys footy, mixed footy. I've done it all. I love it all, and I think regardless of where I am in my football, I would always make sure that I'm out on the pitch, on the grass, make sure I'm putting in the hours to help the next generation.
And I love that. I love how you say, I know myself, and that little quote there, because when it comes to knowing yourself, it is quite difficult within life because obviously a lot of podcasts, a lot of information is out there, and this comes down to a lot of our mental health, our well-being and so on. And a lot of people don't actually know themselves truly inside out to make those key decisions. And especially being that 16, 17-year-old coming through it, it's about them finding themselves where they are going to go. And we're not the complete person at that time. We might not be the complete person that we are now at this age either. Being later on in our 20s, but I love that you say you know yourself in that sense and know what you want and where you're going to go, and that you want to play football for as long as possible, and it's going to be something that you pursue, because a lot of people would give up on things, especially in the women's game, for example, as you say earlier, because you know it can be quite difficult because you could say, right, you know what, I've got a partner now, I've got a flat, or suddenly you might find yourself pregnant. And then you go, do you know what, I can get maternity leave off my job, whereas whereas football might go, do you know what, you're at the end of your contract, or we have to try and give this to try and get you back in a year, or there's a lot more variables in that sense, and it's such a shame. But you know, there's a lot of life that comes with it in terms of that, and you know, it's great. You know, when a lot of other professional footballers that I speak to who are females, there's sort of a lot of conversation does delve into that, because like sooner or later I have to make that decision if I want to make a family, or whether I delay having one, or whether I stop playing or give up playing or try to come back from it. And I know that you said that you know yourself and you are pursuing football for as long as you can play. But is it sort of in the back of your mind then having a family at some point, what, towards 30s?
Yeah, like that's a great question. I think for me, it's weirdly, ever since I was a kid, I've always said never going to have a kid till I'm over 32, and it's always been an ongoing joke between me and my dad. I'm a little daddy's girl, so my dad's like, no grandkids for a long time. I've got a brother as well, and they're like, not until we're at least in our 60s and you're over in your 30s. And in my head, I don't know why that's just always stuck, and it's never because I've sat there and gone, I don't want kids till I'm 32. It's just something that's just always been in the back of my mind, because I think growing up, like, I think I was always taught that you get to your peak 27, 28, 29 as a footballer, you then start to die down at 32, 33. And weirdly, that's just always been the little voice in the back of my head, like as I've grown up. And I definitely want a family. I definitely want a little five-a-side team of kids when I do, and I really do. but when the time's right. And I think if it happens, then it happens, and I've got to reevaluate where I am and what I do. But in terms of my planning, I hope it doesn't happen for another 5-6 years, but that's when I'd like to look at kind of that side of my life. And I think I said earlier, like, football's weirdly, it's such a short career. You can be done by 32, 33, and then all of a sudden you've got another 50, 60, potentially 50 years ahead of you to go and do something completely different. And I just want to make sure I give as much as I can to playing football, because I don't want to get in 10 years' time regret not playing for as long as I could, because you won't be able to go back to it. It's not like in a job you can, for example, me as a teacher, I'm a teacher, I could stop teaching now, but I could actually go back to that in 10, 15 years, because it doesn't matter your age on the role or physicality. Whereas as a footballer, no, I doubt I'll be moving very well at 40 to be. Actually, I say that our left back's 38 years old, and she is an absolute machine and outstanding. But I don't think I'm quite the physically as fit as her. But it's a tough. I want a family, but I think in my little 5-year plan, I think that's at the end of it right now.
And, it's great that you sort of got that in the back of your mind, and, you can see the older players and where you're going to be in that. And hopefully it does work out for you, and the right options come for you, because, it is difficult whether we pursue our careers and those choices, whether we weigh up personal life or we try to balance it. And you see some people that we work with, I think you have to have a very focused mindset. And I was just having this conversation yesterday in terms of what carves out those who make it and those who want to keep pursuing, like being a professional footballer, out from everyone else. And it's difficult then, because you look at the other people, they're like, right, they're settled, they got a family, they got this and that, and it's like, right, sometimes do I have to sort of switch off and go back down and go, right, I'm happy with that balance, or will I hold back my personality in terms of that innate experiences and who I am in terms of pursuing? And as you say, you don't want to regret anything. And I know my best mates, he is the most chill person, happiest to have the most ability. He's worked in the same school for 7 years, and he's not going anywhere for the next 10. He's going to live in the house that he was grown up in. He's got a missus who works in the same school as him, missus who does the same job as what his mum does. It's so weird in terms of how it's worked out. And I'm like, mate, don't you want to do a degree? No. Do you want to teach? No. Do you want to do anything? He's like, no. I'm like, mate, how are you so chilled? Like, I've always got to have something going on. And sometimes I'm looking like, oh, I wish I was as chilled as him. But I'm like, naturally, all these things keep cropping up. It's like, oh, I get this off my plate, and then something else comes on. And I just think we have to, certainly, as you say, to pursue those things, to not regret it in 10 years. So, hopefully everything, works out professionally and personally for you. But it's quite difficult, because then when we do put things professionally first, a lot of people don't seem to understand that or get it at times.
Yeah, and I think I probably first learned that when I was a kid, and when I signed for Arsenal, and God, I was about 14, and we all know what 14-year-old kids are like, and they're, staying over and having house parties or field. But I know what my mates were doing, and I missed out on a lot of that, because I was in Friday night. I was in bed by 9:30, 10 o'clock, because I had a game on a Saturday. On a Saturday afternoon, I was then recovering, because then Sunday was like my off day, and then I'm back into school, then training Monday, Tuesday, Thursday games. You know what I mean? And the routine of I loved it. I was up in the morning. I was a youth international as well, and went from 15 to 21s. And we used to get sent home training programs that me and my dad would go in a field and do at 6 o'clock in the morning, because when he'd finish work, I'd go to school, go train in the evening. And that was my life. I dedicated everything from when I was about 14 to football. And I realised then that the amount I missed out on, and I remember prom, actually, it was on a Friday night, and all my mates went to a house party and drank. I couldn't, because I had a game the next day. And I probably did lose a lot of friends, or what I thought were friends then, or people that acquaintances, because Lauren doesn't come out, Lauren's boring, Lauren never here. And I missed out on going to school, and I'd missed out on the banter, and I didn't understand what was going on. I'd then fall behind in school because I had to leave early for football. So then I'm doing extra, and then all of a sudden you get perceived this like quite boring person who loves school when I really didn't, and just dedicated everything to football. And so when I obviously moved away, and for the first time at 16, 17, played for a couple of years, and again I was just professional to the bone. Went to college. Obviously I went to college every day, trained twice a day, was always in the gym. And then when I picked up an injury, I had a head injury that kept me out of the game for about 18 months. All of a sudden I was like, I don't know what to do, because I dedicated everything to football, and everyone was like, all you do is footy, all you do is footy. And I go, yeah, because that's all I know. All of a sudden I've hit 18 now, I'm injured, and I'm living in Bristol, and I did go off the rails a little bit because I couldn't play. all of a sudden I'm doing all the things that I probably should have done at 14, which I'm only just doing now. I think, like you said earlier, when I was like 17 and all my mates were going out at 18, I was like, do I go? Do I not go? Do I find a way to be out? And I think now as you get older, I still always dedicated my life to football, but you realise actually who's on the journey with you as a supporter or who's just kind of tagging along because it looks good. You really, I would rather have a very small group of loyal friends that understand me and what I believe in my journey compared to a load of people that I think are my friends that are just kind of tagging along for the ride.
Absolutely, and I really love that, and I'm just noting that as a quote on the journey as a supporter. And it's so true because even now, as you say, you are coaching. We don't have the most sociable hours. Your coaching sessions are late at night. There's a lot going on in the week, and then suddenly it might be a game we need to coach on a Saturday. Plus, you're playing, and then by the time you fit all that in across a week, and your weekend's gone, you're sort of into the next week, and then the next week, and then so on. And people don't seem to comprehend or understand that you are traveling, that you might have that fatigue from coaching and playing. That on your one night off, you don't want to go out or do things. You're happy to relax and just chill out. And some people don't seem to understand that, and it is quite difficult because you can go in and teach all day. Like I work in a school. You're in school at like 7:30. You go straight from school, then you're leaving 4, 4:30, getting straight home, quick to eat, and then bang straight out the training. You're home then 9, 10 o'clock, and so you're into Tuesday already before you know it, and it's repeat the rest of the week. And like when it comes to Wednesday night, it's my first night off between sort of Sunday to then Wednesday.
Yeah.
That's a long week before having a sort of break to go, right, breathe. And it's like Wednesday night, I just want to chill out. And it's like some people are like, oh, but you're free. I'm like, well, I am, but I'm not really.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that you look after yourself. And I think I've had relationships break down because of football. I've had friendships break down. I've probably argued with my parents at times when I was a bit younger because of footy. And like you said, because when you have an off day or when you've got a bit of time off, you just don't want to do anything. And I remember I speak about the time, but I had a relationship with my partner, my boyfriend at the time, and I was out coaching. I didn't come home till 10 o'clock at night, and I was leaving at 7 o'clock in the morning. And all of a sudden, I didn't really have a social life. And it was then when you're choosing football over me, and I go, well, yeah, I am, because football has been here before you, and football will be here after you, and that's the one thing I'm going to dedicate myself to. We laugh and joke about it now, but it's an industry where if you really, really take it seriously and want to be the best that you can, especially like for me, where as a coach and a player, and I'm like on the training pitch at 5 o'clock in the evening, and potentially not finished training until 10 o'clock at night, and then I've got my job in the daytime. It's quite hard to buy into. And you've only really got yourself to kind of motivate yourself and look after yourself. You're in these different environments. I've got my teammates, I've got coaching staff, I've then obviously got my family, but you yourself only realise what you're doing and the sacrifices you're making and actually how much you want it. And I think when you said earlier about people being successful, the reason why people go on and do big and wonderful things is because they've put themselves first for a long period of time and made sure they've studied the game, they're students of the game, that they've put in the graft, and all of the stuff that actually you don't learn on these coaching courses. You go in, shadow other coaches, go and gain experience with other coaches, and that stuff you can't pay for. You just have to go and do it, and you don't earn any money from it. You just got to be in that environment. And I think the reason why people are successful is because they give up their own time to go and do that, and they've put the job in the industry first before themselves, which I think they'll thank them for later on in life when they can then have a few more days laying at home and go out and socialising a little bit more.
Absolutely, and again, we are students of the game, and we're not taught that on our courses and stuff. And it's great that you say about relationship, and it's unfortunate that it has broken down. But obviously, in the pursuit of things, sometimes it is unfortunate but fortunate. And I was speaking to a young footballer yesterday. She's only 21, and she's got practically starting out on her career. Really, she's from Australia. She said she would love to go to Europe at some point. And then she was talking about her partner a little bit, and I was going, how's that going to work out? Will he want to move? Will he want to leave his job? Will he want to go abroad with you? Does he want to even contemplate that? And it's quite difficult then to comprehend that because you're putting on a lot of emotion, and sometimes you see a lot of things out there where highly successful people don't have to have emotion and have to switch that off at times because it is about trying to get there and then see what happens, and people can't understand that. But in terms of that sense, then when you do speak about a partner, is that something that you have now, or is it something that you go, right, I'm going to sort of not look out for it too much, but if it comes along it happens, great, but if it doesn't, I'm happy to wait till the end of my playing career?
I've got a really, really good group of friends, and not necessarily I don't have a partner. But I've got such a good group of friends that were in the football industry. So I'm really close with a lot of people at Oxford United and the first team manager. Weirdly, our psychotherapist, who's my friend, not my psychotherapist, at the academy manager of the boys. Weirdly, my women's first team manager is probably one of my best mates off the pitch. And because we know the industry and we know the game, it's sometimes quite nice to wind down with them. And that's kind of my social, because people get it if you're having a down day. People get it if, for example, results aren't going your way. And because you're a part of that group, you can relate to it. If someone's a little bit miserable at the table, you go, just give them a minute, they'll be all right in a minute, rather than being that pestering person, being like, what's up, what's the matter? There's nothing more worse than losing a game of footy and someone badgering you, asking you why you're not okay, and I hate it. I know, like, when I lose a game of football, people know to leave me alone. My dad will come give me a hug at the end of a game and won't say anything because he knows how much it affects me. Or if I've had a bad game, and people know, kind of, because they're in the industry, they get it. When people aren't in the industry and people come and try and socialise with you and then have a go at you for not being chirpy after you've just lost, that's really difficult to try and manage, especially, like, I know for me and the people that I socialise with, that's really difficult. And I get snappy, or not just me, but I know other people in the industry get snappy, then you come across as being rude, and then all of a sudden you get this perception of you not being a nice person but actually it's just because how much you love the game. And when you surround yourself with people, of like-minded people, it's a good, healthy social life. And I'm so grateful for the core of people that I do socialise with when I am away from the game, because it just helps me unwind better, and it just helps me actually then be better for when I go back.
And it's great that you talk about, that sort of touching on personality there and understanding them, which is so important because, as you say, when your dad just hugs you at the end of the game, he's not the pest you, because, coaches automatically want to address something straight away, or they want to try and have that feedback, or they try and want to open up what's wrong, or Lauren, why you like this? And sometimes it's just like, right, give me a couple of hours and ring me later, or let's just chat about it next session. Sometimes it's just best to leave it and then sort of address it, because, as we're highly fueled then in terms of emotions, it's not always the most beneficial place to have that sort of conversation. And it's great that, essentially, as Rio Ferdinand says, we're a product of our environment, and I absolutely live by that. And when we say we surround ourselves by people who understand that and are like-minded, I think that's so important, because as soon as we're not like-minded, it can be so difficult to have that. And as I say to my best mate, he is my best mate, but he is the most frustrating person to be around, because our minds are just so different from each other. And I know someone who's my other friend said, I don't know how you two are friends because you're so different. We're very alike in some ways, but a lot of, in terms of how we push ourselves, is so different. And I get so frustrated by him, and sometimes I just have to remove myself. And it's hard because he is my best mate, but I have to remove myself because, like, mate, you're just energy sapping me.
Yeah, and like you said there, I think, like, with my manager, like, he knows how to deal with. We've been friends as well off the pitch, and I've known him 7 years, so I hope he knows me. But I'll make a mistake in a game, and I'm the first person to put my hands up and go, my bad, or if I've done something that's led to a goal, which isn't often, but it happens. I'll address the change room straight away and say that wasn't good enough for my. If I've lost a runner on a corner, for example, I'll go, that's my fault. Bam. He knows he doesn't need to hammer me, because he knows I'd have owned up to the situation, or he can see me owning up there and then and taking accountability and responsibility for something, or a lapse of judgment in a game. And he knows he doesn't need to hammer me, whereas some players would do that, not take accountability, and they need telling because they think it's okay to be sloppy or not own up. And that's one good thing about why I feel like I can be quite comfortable in the dressing room and at footy. But on the flip side, he knows if he has a go at me as his captain, it raises the standards of everyone else. But quite lucky, he actually gives me the heads up sometimes. He's like, I'm going to batter you here. It's nothing personal, but I need to batter you for this situation. Because he knows if he batters me without an explanation, I will lose my head. And that's just from knowing and working with each other for years. Like, we've had some of the worst arguments on the pitch, but then go and have a pint after and be like, oh, how's your week? Do you know what I mean? And like that. And I think you said there about your clash of different personalities of your mate. One of my best friends is 64 years old. I think he's 64. He'll kill me if not. And we are so different. But because we're so different, we're so good. And he's like, I'd never call him a father figure because my dad is my dad and no one can replace that. But he is like a mentorship and a kind of a figure that I do look up to, and like a role model within the game. Not that he could play footy, but in terms of what he does and what he offers me from a different, like, 2 generations of life experience probably ahead of me. He's one of my best mates. I call him and be like, Gary, what you doing? And he'll be like, oh, well, I'll come and meet you quickly, have a chat, or call me after a game or before a game and just give me like a little chat. And same with him, because he has his problems, and I come from a younger generation where I've gone, oh, you'll be all right, like, you'll be fine, you're worried about it too much. And you need them different personalities, I think, if you want to be healthy and successful.
Absolutely, and that relates so nicely because as I was coming back home this morning, after popping out, I was listening to the Fozcast again, and they were just talking about how they, if they were to be a manager, they would look for personality first over technical ability. And they said that if they were to recruit a good group of players based on personality, they reckon they could stay up in the Premier League based on that alone, rather than the technical ability. And they related that back to Sean Dyche in terms of what he does and how he's built his career. And when it comes down to teams, obviously being a coach now yourself and being a player and a captain, do you do personality tests on players when they come in and sort of look how will that fit into our philosophy here, or is it more technical based and then sort of personality?
I think in the academy, in the younger age groups, because we probably do look a little bit more technically and how they move physically, and we'll also have a look at their personality as well. But what I feel like with the younger age groups is that their personality from when they're 10-year-old can be very different to when they're 15 years old. So I think when we're looking in the foundation phase, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, as long as they're not rude and inconsiderate and things like that, I think if they're a good footballer, they're a good footballer because you can help them and give them the education in terms of conduct on the pitch, in terms of their social skills, in terms of the psychological side a little bit, and you can all not mould it, but you can help them and lead them onto a pathway of making good decisions and less bad decisions. When they get a little bit older and obviously personalities are more formed, I think that's when it gets a little bit more difficult. So if we recruit a new player in the first team, Liam, who's our gaffer, will go to me, just see what they're like as a person, have a few conversations, try and suss them out, because we know what they're going to be like as a footballer, because we wouldn't have brought them in if they weren't any good. So we've had players that have come in, and if they don't fit the group, regardless of how good they are, they won't be here, because we need people that are on the same page. And we've actually had some very, very good players come in and gone, no, thank you, it's not the right club for you, because of their personality. And actually we need people that are going to push the group, not hold the group back. So all the players that we'd rather bring in somebody with a lesser footballer, but an outstanding personality that will live and die for the team and run through a brick wall and will give 100% every session, than somebody that's, I don't know, an outstanding footballer but isn't going to run, is going to moan at everybody, is going to bring the group down. And I think although you want that player because they're going to score you goals and potentially help you, at the end of the day it's a team game, and you need to make sure everybody's happy and everyone's on the same page. And so the older you get, I think personality is huge compared to when they're a little bit younger.
Absolutely, I love that. And when you get a new player in, is there a sort of refined program then that you integrate them into, or is it how do you integrate them as a captain?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, weirdly, I think I quite know them because of the women's game. You tend to know people, or at least somebody in the team knows them or knows of them. And it's very rare do we get somebody in that nobody's ever heard of or nobody's ever seen before, because just how the women's game is. And I think I'll always, as a captain, I'll always make sure that if they're any good, I will go and be their best mate, because I want them to come in and go, yeah, this club is class. And I'll be like the girls, I'll be like, get around this player. She's class. Like, we need to make sure that she feels welcomed and happy, even if it's somebody in my position. Do you know what I mean? I'm old enough now to go, if she's better than me, she plays. Like, I want what's best for the football club, and I just want to play whatever part I can in that. If actually we think that, or I think, I've got some concerns, I'll speak to the gaffer and be like, I'm not a fan of this, but you can work on it. Or actually being within this environment, they might adapt their personality and work out for the group. And like I said, there's some players I've gone, absolutely don't. I said, I've got a gut feeling, no chance. And not that it's my decision. He'll ask the vice captain, he'll ask some of the other senior players, he'll ask the younger players as well. And then obviously him and the coaching staff will make an informed decision off of that, and actually how impactful are they going to be. And I think the word impact is everything. Like, their personalities in the dressing room, their performance on the pitch, and they have to have some sort of impact in order to be a part of the squad, especially within Oxford. where we've been really, really successful the last few years.
It's great that you sort of have that relationship with the coach and you can go and approach things and he looks to you for your opinions and he talks to the other squad members, because that's such an important place to create that culture, that environment that you're looking for in terms of how supportive it is, how dynamic the relationships are, the communication elements, etc. And it's not easy to integrate a new player, and sometimes, you know, as you say, it can be difficult because then other players might go, oh, she's come in, she's going to take my place, and then there's little things like that start arising. But when you're in a position where you're understanding like yourself, you're like, right, I want what's best for the football club, as you said earlier, it's that team environment. It's so important to create that because, again, football is that business world and a lot of people are out there for themselves, and that's what is so hard to sort of deal with sometimes, because we try to create these environments where we are families, where we are friends, where we want to have those relationships, but people want to come in, get their money, or they want to see it as a stepping stone, or they want to try and utilise it for a better move. And it can be so difficult then because the change room can sort of change depending on how you go around the change room to what part of the seats that you're looking at to where the other part of the team is.
Yeah, it's difficult. Like, we've had players that have come in that have used us for a stepping stone, that have maybe come down from the league above, had a bit of a bad year or come back from an injury, using us a little bit to then go get their move the next year. And I think that's fine if they're honest about it. And, you know, we have had players that, I think we've had a couple of players actually that done their ACLs in the league above, needed some game time, and knowing that they're only going to be here a year. And I think if everyone's on board with that, I think that's absolutely okay, because if you're good and actually you can perform better than where you're at, then why would we not want you to go and have a better career elsewhere? And I think clubs need to be really, really, although clubs want to keep the best players, I think the better clubs are the ones that actually will allow them better players to go on and play, and you're then respected because of that. And I've seen clubs before that actually they'll push everything into keeping a player who doesn't want to be there because they know that they can play the next step. Or I think that, and that's one thing that Oxford do great, is that they look after the players. If they'll help them with moves, if they go at the end of the year, actually, Gaffer, I want to go and have another challenge in the league above, he'll go, whether he believes it or not, he'll go, okay, like, that's your decision. Because if a player mentally doesn't want to be here, it's difficult then to get them to perform, because, you know, in the back of their head they're thinking of something else. And we had a youngster who's still with us actually, and she was one of our top goal scorers. Great little player. In the league above, she would get demolished. And there's something I'd say to her face, like, you will get demolished. She goes at the end of the year, well, I'm top goal scorer, I think I should go. And she needed knocking down a little peg or two and go, look, you need to establish yourself in this league. You're only 18, you need to make sure you've got plenty of experience, because the last thing you want to do is go get signed for a bigger club and sit on the bench and then come back on loan to us next year. And I think you can be quite harsh with players in that sense, because I think it's an education rather than them thinking that they don't want to be here because they're better than the club. It's in the education around the youngsters. But if they don't want to be here, they don't want to be here, and you need to make sure that you do everything in your power to make sure they're happy that they're playing their football, and the better clubs do that.
And it's great that you say about when players do come down, and, you know, if they've come back off the back of an ACL and, you know, they're only going to be there for a year. When we talk about impacts, they could come in and have such that impact in terms of their experience, their personality, where it could be so impactful where they are just for a year and then they move on, that it could have that lasting effect, or they brought in something different and something that you weren't doing before. You're like, all right, we could actually raise our standards here, or look at the different ways that we're playing, or how we adapted to there, or this is the kind of player that we had from this league. How can we develop this younger player into this player, or so on? And I think that it's important to have those experienced players, as we said again, back to when it come to 23s and that youth league, in terms of that impact, which is so important. And when it comes down to it then, as a player yourself and as a coach, is it easier to find players to fit your system, or is it easier to change the system to fit your players?
Oh, good question. If you asked me 5 years ago, I think we go with you find players that are good and you build the system around the players that you've got. So when we were in the WSL and when we moved down, we lost players, and I think myself and a couple of others stuck by the team and said, no, let's give this a go. And I remember the recruitment and the manager coming in, and we took anyone. We didn't take anybody, but we took what was available, and we had to then, because we never really had an identity in place, because all the core of the team left. So we had to we went with a rebuilding stage, and it probably took us about 3 seasons to really find our identity in terms of how we wanted to play. The gaffer was doing his A license at the time, so for him he had to do it quite quickly because of the league, and he was sussing out actually his style and how that links in with the football club, because everyone says, oh, it's the Oxford United way of playing. It's not. And I don't think any club can do that unless you're the first team. Like, the women's team will have a different identity, and if they're both matched, that would be the most bizarre thing ever. So it took us about 3 years to find our real identity of actually how we wanted to play, in possession, out of possession, all the transition stuff, if we're going to be a high pressing team, if we're going to be a ball playing team. And that took us a while. And we had some horrendous defeats, we've had some great wins, and it took us a while to really identify that. So in the last couple of years, actually, now when we've got the core of the team and we've got an understanding of how we want to play and win games, we've then actually been able to go out and recruit for players to fit the system. So we signed a girl last year, incredible signing, a girl called Beth. She come from Charlton, wasn't getting a lot of game time in the league above, come to us, outstanding footballer, become top goal scorer. She went and played for Southampton now this year and signed for her, and she fitted our system. And because she was so good, it attracted then other players to go, oh bloody hell, Oxford United are a high scoring team, the high press and the energy, because of the way that she played, which then adapted the way we play a little bit, which is now why we're probably so, I'm not saying it's all because of her, but like she played a massive part in that, of why we're so successful this year and why we play the way that we play this year. We've just made 3 January signings, a centre half, a centre midfielder and a wide player. And we've brought them in because they fit our system in terms of how we want to play. And we played on Wednesday night and we battered the team 5-1, and all 3 of them players played, and I think two of them scored 2 goals each, and it just shows that actually we're coming in and we're improving all the time. And it's nice to be able to pick and choose players a little bit more rather than having to go and find them, because players are coming to us.
And it's good that you are in that position, and it's great that the players have had that impact already and they've had that growth opportunity, because it can be difficult, because I know, for example, Joe Mourinho says his principles are his principles and you change everything around that, whereas some people would say it's vice versa, you keep your system and then change your principles dependent. And it's quite an interesting conversation in terms of how we go about adapting that and how that changes in terms of coaching, or how we adapt, or whether we stay true to that. And I know it's a very interesting conversation when it comes down to those systems and that. But it's great that you talk about how you found your system, your identity, and you took that time to establish what you needed and wanted, and how a player might have that impact or might have that change. And when obviously that intensity came out then, which is great. And when it comes down to it then, what are your key playing principles in terms of Oxford United women?
Yeah, we're definitely a ball playing team. We do play attractive football. As much as people put on a pen and paper that we're a team that likes to play attractive football, we actually do. The last year, 18 months or so, we've really focused on the physical side as well, in terms of making sure we're athletes. We play on the high press. We dominate teams, and if we can win the ball in the final third, we'll go and punish there. We do score goals from building up through the thirds and all of that, but ideally we go win the ball higher up the pitch, and then allows our back four to just kind of relax a little bit and do their roles and responsibilities. And we know that we can change if we need to. For example, when we play in the FA Cup and when we play against teams that also like to play possession-based football, we know that we can sit into a bit of a block and be really organised and really regimented in that sense. We've got a great bunch of players. We've got some really good leaders with some great experience, and yeah, we just love rotations. We love transit. Like, we just love, and I like the counter press, which has now become a thing. We love winning the ball on a counter press and being nice and attacking, going forward and scoring goals. And we score goals and we concede very little. So.
And that's great. And when it comes down to the gaffer instilling some non-negotiables, what would you say they are in the dressing room and on off the pitch?
Yeah, he's a stickler for time. I know, like, everyone in terms has to be on time, but he is a stickler for time. If you're not on the training pitch 5 minutes before, everybody runs. You could be there 20 minutes before the training session and one person kills you and everyone goes. And it's weird because he's the most English man in terms of his personality, but he's got such an Americanized sort of motivation and all around him. He spent a bit of time in the States. So he's very motivational. He's very, you live and die for the team sort of stuff. I sometimes, I'll say it to his face, I find it quite cringy. I don't get motivated by all the quotes and all of the big hype up and the raising the voice, whereas I know some people do. He's someone who's like, go give everything out on the pitch, and if you don't give everything on the pitch, you're coming off, and he's quite brutal like that. He knows if you're slacking because of your own effort. He doesn't have any of that, and he won't deal with any of that. He's honest, which can upset people, but also really benefit people. But he'll point out from the start that that's how he is. And if you want to work with him, you've got to understand that you've got to accept criticism, and he'll work out best how you do accept criticism. And on the flip side with praise, because we all know, I think we focus on criticism a lot, and some players hate being shouted at because it makes them feel weak, it makes them feel demotivated. Like for me, for example, you can shout at me and I'll be like, yeah, fair enough, as long as it's justified. If you don't tell me I don't make a mistake, like, I already know I've made a mistake. But we're on the flip side with praise. If I get too much praise, I get complacent. So he knows actually then, like, just give her a clap or yes, a well done, rather than pulling me to the side being like, oh, you've been excellent today, because I don't deal with that very well. But with some players, they need that reassurance and they need that praise. And I think he's a good people manager, and he's worked out players, not just him, but the coaching staff as well. We've got Shares, who's an ex-player, used to play for us, retired, so she's great with the girls. We've got Kath as well, also an ex-player. So we've got players in there that are kind of the barrier between the gaffer and the players, which is quite nice. And standards are very high.
And that's exactly what you want, and it's great that you talk about those high standards, because some players, as you say, especially at under-19s now, where I've come in and I have that academy experience, and as much as it is grassroots, I'm like, well, the whole purpose and objective is to try and get the first team now. So that I've come in with very high standards, and I know I've been questioned by one or two players, only one or two, and I'm like, right, boys, you have to achieve them. There is no negotiation about this. These are the non-negotiables. You have to comply with them. This is the expectation. You're now stepping up. You're not only young players, you're also young adults as well, and this is going to benefit you off the pitch as well. And I know I was approached by one mum. She said, I know you've worked with very high players, but this is not the type of caliber. And I'm like, you've already dropped your standards already. I know they're not the highest standards of players, and that's why I want to come in. I want to give them that purpose, and even if they're not the highest standard of player, can they have the highest standards in terms of those expectations of being on time, turning up early, giving it their all, trying to work as hard as possible on the pitch, trying to do it for one of each other whilst they're out there. And there's so much more which comes to that, which is so important to play that part. And it's great that the expectations are there, and I think it's great that you say that how you're stimulated and you're motivated as well, because again, that is so important when it comes down to personality. And sometimes that comes down to us as coaches as well, in terms of what we do in the changing room. So we might have a game, and before a game we might be very tactical orientated in terms of our systems and the way we want to play it. And then we might go into a bit of motivational, or some coaches go, right, we've done that in training, it's all about the motivational side now. And sometimes I am giving a team talk before a game, and I'm like, right, am I giving not enough tactics? Am I giving too much motivation? And I'm reflecting on myself as I'm doing it, and I think it's a very refined balance. And when you look at, like, for example, Ted Lasso, a TV show, I know it is a TV show, but it literally, when it comes down to it, is all about motivation. And sometimes I'm like, right, we can overkill it in terms of some of the tactical detail and too much focus, that some of the players are right, I know my game, I just need a bit of this, and off I go. So again, it's so important to come down to personality in terms of how we approach that change room then, and go from there. And I know that you are in a very good position in terms of Oxford United Women's this year, very good position to go on and do well. But when you sort of set out a season, I know, a manager might say, right, the objective is to finish mid-table, or to avoid relegation, depending on where you are. But will he set out a lot of objectives at the start of the season and go, right, we're going to win the league this year?
Yeah. So obviously we have a few different meetings actually. So the coaching staff will have a meeting, the players will have a meeting, and then myself, the vice captain, and the coaching staff will have a meeting, and I'll have a meeting with Liam and the coaching staff, and they'll go to me, this is what we want as a coaching staff. You go and find out from the players what you want. And so I would then go and host a meeting with the players, none of the staff involved, and I'll kind of keep to myself what they've said and just kind of play devil's advocate in this meeting and just kind of get the girls' understanding and feelings. And I remember this year, and the first thing it was, just want to win the league. Just want to win the league, get promoted. We're not bothered about the cup. We're not bothered about the League Cup. We want to do well in it, but we're not bothered about the League Cup and not bothered about the FA Cup. We want to give absolutely everything into the league. Now that was slightly different to what the coaching staff wanted. They wanted to make at least quarterfinals and whatever. But because of the buy-in of what the players wanted and how much they wanted promotion, we didn't feel like, and we don't feel like, although it's nice to win the League Cup and do well in the FA Cup because you get a few quid out of that, but it's not the priority. And what would really make players motivated is what we actually wanted to do in the league. And so that all gets fed back. And we'll also have a meeting in terms of expectation and standards. And so I will host this meeting and get all the girls' thoughts in and say, look, what do we want to do? What do we want to achieve this year? We also, when we decided actually that we just want to focus on the league and we want to do well in the cup, but it's not our priority. As soon as the fixtures come out, we put them into like little blocks of 4. So we take fixtures, although we take it a game at a time, we take them 4 games at a time, and we think the data people do all the stats and they work out how many goals you've got to score, how many points win the league, and what's won the league in previous years. And I think they gave us a number, I can't remember what it was now, but let's just say, I don't know, 56, for example, points wins you the league. We go block 1, 4 games. How many points out of that block do we need to win? So we need to win 4 out of 4 based on the teams that are in there. So we know if they're bottom half teams, we'd probably get 12 points out of there. If we've got another block of, I don't know, Watford, Ipswich, Cheltenham, MK, we might take 6, 7 points out of there, and we work it out like that. So then we've got like these achievable goals upon block on block. At the end of the 4 games, we see where we are, evaluate. We fall low in one block, we know we've got to be better in the next block of games. If we overachieve the next block of games and we lose the next game, then it takes a little bit of the pressure off because we can still see that achievable target. And I think that's something that's worked really, really well for us, especially last year, and it's working really good for us this year as well, because it makes sure everyone's on the same page. It has people are motivated by it because people can see it. And I think obviously then depending on what other teams as well do in the league, it can change a little bit, but we know kind of if we're on track, if we need to actually, the coaching staff need to change stuff or players need to change stuff, or actually if we're doing well, or if we go for a bit of a blip, it's not the end of the world because we can still build up points later on or whatever. And I think that's been a really good tool because it's visual to see. And also you can talk about it and it works for all types of players.
And that's great because that links in with another question that I sort of had, because obviously you're now in that very good position where you're currently second in the league, you're 1 point behind Portsmouth with 2 games in hand, you're 4 points clear of third place, and you've only lost once all season so far. So it is a very good position to put yourself in, and it's now you're on the tail end towards the end of the season. You're in touching distance of what could be a winning league or not winning the league. And now it's about how you keep that consistency going but not become too complacent. And it's great that you say break it down in blocks of 4 and how you might approach this now and not go, right, we got 8 games left and it has to be this. Because sometimes that can be so overwhelming. You're like, right, we're going to run out of fuel before we get to game 6, let alone try and, get to game 8 where it might come down to the wire, for example. And it's quite a tough position. You are in a great position, but it's also tough because you need to maintain that distance between third, but you also need to go, right, we need to clinch on the first, and once we're there, we need to get running even further to bridge that gap further between us and Portsmouth to go on and win the league. And it's now that sort of back end of the season which is so important, where at the start of the season you might have just slipped up and you can still recover that ground depending on how the other teams perform around you. But if you're on the back end of the season, you slip up and Portsmouth go, hello, off they go, it can be make or break then at that point.
Yeah, and I think the weird thing about our league is you have to win the league and then win a playoff against the North in order to be promoted. It's so hard. So in order for us, we have to be playing good football to be getting the points on the board. And I think I'd rather have the points in games in hand, but to only be 1 point off top of 2 games in hand, it is quite comfortable. But and again, it's down to personalities and how people look at that. Like I stress that we've got 2 games in hand, because you've still got to play them games of football and I would rather have the points on the board. And, Pompey are one of them teams where I know they lost the other day, but and this is going to sound horrible, but they're an okay team, but they win games of football and they battle, and their style of football is not playing attractive football or playing good football at all. They just score goals and just are ruthless out of possession. Watford, we know that are going to be chasing up the leaderboard pretty soon. Have got some really, really experienced players. They train a lot more than us. The budget's bigger than ours, and we know that they'll be playing catch up and they'll be frustrated with their league position because of their standards as a club and where they were before. We know Ipswich as well will be frustrated in terms of where they're at, because I think they did what we did last year. They went unbeaten all the way up until January, and then they messed up towards the rear end of the season because of the experience in the squad. They had young players and they didn't quite have enough experience to carry out the season. And we know really it's going to be between us 4 in the kind of the battle contention. And it's exciting because you want to play competitive games. Every game, you want to make sure that you're going in like you have to win. You want to have that little bit of anxiety and a little bit of nerves, otherwise you probably don't care. And you want to every game have that sort of that pressure, but at the same time, you don't want too much pressure where you're chasing too much, because that's quite difficult to cope with.
Of course, but it is very exciting as well that you are in that touching distance and how you go about approaching that now, which is great. And hopefully you can go on and win that title, especially over the hard work you've had all season, and not to jinx it too much. So sort of we'll leave it at that, because I know some players have superstitions about jinxing things, but it's an exciting time to be in, and again, hopefully that will come with it. But it has been fascinating, because obviously you've got that coaching background, you're currently playing, you're in a great position. There's a lot in terms of going on in your life, where you're going to go, how you sort of got there, and it's been great to sort of establish this and have this conversation. And there's so much more which I could delve into in terms of you can play some defensive football, you can play midfield, how do you adapt your game. As you get older, you're starting to prepare. Right, I might have to drop off and be more defensive. And there's so many key considerations when it comes down to player and coach. And it's been great to actually talk about the position which we're in, what your thoughts are in terms of balancing up between coach and person, and really focusing on terms of the person yourself, in terms of where you are now, where you're going to go, what you want to do with things, and supporting you, which is great. And I'm really grateful that we could get this organised so quickly this week, and it only took a very quick amount of time. I was so happy and pleased. But before I let you go, I got some quick fire questions for you.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so you might have already answered this one, but there could be two people for this. There might be three people, but who or is your main role model?
Yeah, my dad, 100% my dad. Yeah, the matter of that, 100%. Yeah.
But in terms of playing, then Lampard.
Yeah, it was Lampard. So I just love the way he plays. I just love him as a person, and weirdly, I have got another one which was Kieran Tierney, that you can obviously see behind me. That even though he's younger than me, but just I love the way he went through Celtic Academy, loved what he did and all the passion that he had on the pitch. And then I think one game, and it sticks out for me, he got one of his teeth knocked out, went quickly to the hospital, ran back in his footy boots to make sure he could lift the trophy in the Scottish Cup. And for me, that's just pure passion. If somebody who really loves the game, and is someone that I tell all kids to kind of look up and look at his journey for, because he's an incredible. He went to Arsenal, which is a bit of a shame, but I understand.
Love that. That's a great one. I think stories like that and that passion is innate, as we said earlier on. If you were going to be a professional in any other sport, what sport would it be?
Ooh, I'd say boxing. When I was that injured, I did a lot of boxing because I had to keep off my ankle a little bit, and everyone was saying I could throw a punch or two and I could move quite well. So I got a bit of a knack for it, and the last few months or so, I think I could have done this. Probably not with my head. But I reckon boxing would have been quite cool to go into.
Yeah, cool. All right. Sound a bit like Katie Taylor there, because she was supposed to be a really good footballer as well as a boxer, so all-rounded. A full-time football player at the highest caliber level in terms of playing for England and top-level club and a full-time contract, or being a full-time gaffer and having a coaching team behind you?
Oh, what's the question? Yeah, I want to be a gaffer. That'd be cool. Yeah, have a team behind me, be successful, do what our philosophy, what we want to do, and go be successful in helping others. That's a bit of me.
I'll take that answer, especially because I would answer that the same way. I think I've done some reading into this, but do you have any superstitions as a footballer?
I think I did, and then now I don't. I think I don't know what you've seen, but I know beforehand I have said I've had superstitions, but nowadays I just don't try not to think about the game. I try not to think about anything to do with football anymore until literally I go and warm up. And I think, although it doesn't sound like a superstition, I think it is weirdly a superstition. But I don't know what you've read, so.
Just that you really like sandwiches with lots of butter.
Oh, with lots of butter, yeah. Yeah, that's still a thing. I still have a ham sandwich for a game, actually. Just all the time. Love it.
Yeah, I turned up with sandwiches. Honestly, one of the boys turned up with a sandwich on the side the other week. I turned around looking at the bench, and it's like minutes of kick-off, and they're tucking in the sandwiches. I was like, boys, I've never seen anything like this before.
And they've got to be squished as well. I love them. Yeah, love them.
If you could go and play for any club in the world, where would it be and why?
Celtic.
Yeah.
Would love it. Yeah, would just if I could even get a season or half a season up there, I think just for me, playing for the club that you support and that you love, I think that would just be, I don't know, maybe it'd be class. It's like one of those that you don't meet your heroes, and if you go up there and don't like it, it might put you off a little bit. But yeah, part of me's always gone looking up there, seeing how they're getting on, looking at the squad, thinking, yeah, I can tap into that. But yeah, Celtic, I think would be class.
Great. If you could move to any country in the world, where would it be and why?
South of France.
Yeah.
Just think it's lovely. Yeah, I think just the weather's nice, the surroundings, the environment's nice. Just on the border of obviously Spain. I used to go there all the time as a kid as well, and it's just kind of like my happy place, and it's somewhere I'd like to probably just spend a few years living.
Love that. I think you could definitely fit in there as well. If you could go and play alongside any player, who would it be and why?
Ooh. Kim Little, I think she's outstanding. I think when I was coming up through Arsenal as a youngster, she was there, and I just thought I'd never had envy over a female footballer before, and now I watch her now, and I think she's just unbelievable player and just got so much talent, and I'm jealous of her talent, and I'd love to play with her.
If you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
Oh God, spontaneous, very spontaneous, loyal. And I'd probably say hardworking.
Love it. I would go with energetic, happy, and honest.
Yeah.
Love it, because you haven't stopped smiling since you've been speaking, which is great. I love that. If there's one thing that you want to be remembered for at the end of your career, what would it be?
Helping others, I'd say. Helping and inspiring others in the next generation. That for me, that's huge, and that's something I want to be remembered by.
Class. What is your ultimate goal or dream now as a professional footballer? So whether it's to win the league and get promoted, or whether it's a 5-year contract with a club, or whether it is to go and sign for a Celtic, what is your ultimate dream now at this point?
Yeah, get Oxford promoted back into the WSL, because when I was with them and we come down, I remember quoting it saying, like, I'm going to stay here until we get promoted back to where we belong. And for me, I think that would just be a really nice story, that come down with them, get them back up, and I feel like, not that I want to leave, but if I do leave, I could leave on in a very good place, and I'd be very happy with the achievements that we've made.
Love that. This could be male or female. If you could go and play for any manager, who would it be and why?
Ooh, what's the question that is? Neil Lennon.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think I would have said Brendan Rodgers, but then he left us during when we could have won like the 10 in a row. But I just think, I've had a few conversations with him, and I think he's just class, and I think just playing for, obviously I'm a little bit biased because of Celtic and that, but I think, playing for him would be cool and just different, and just learn a different style of football. Everyone else is going to say like Pep and Jose and things like that, but I don't think I really suit them their managers, so I think someone like Neil Lennon's a little bit more my cup of tea.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always used to watch him and I'd be like, nah, no chance would I play for him. But no, but again, when it comes down to those conversations and knowing someone, just because of what their perception is, through media and whatnot, it can be very different in terms of when you meet down and have that conversation about how you might play or fit in. It is cool. But that's the quick fire ones from me. But I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate your time, especially on a Friday at the end of the week. But it's been great to actually meet you and chat to you, and a big thank you from me, really.
Yeah, no problem. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been lovely to chat to you, and it's been nice to speak about it, and obviously hear your point of view as well. It's been good. No,
it's been great, and again, I really appreciate it. But I wish you best of luck for the rest of the season, and I'll definitely be keeping tabs on the results and hoping you get through. It'd be great to stay in touch. But again, thank you from me.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.